Okay, so we've wound through questions 1 through 8, and we're at the last question on this chapter 5 test review for the one of two parts of the test for chapter 5. This is the first, and this question asks two things, right? We're to identify the x-intercepts and y-intercepts, and to write an equation for each quadratic depicted. And if you think about this in terms of the quadratic web, in part A we're given a table and we're asked for an equation. In part B we're given the graph and we are asked for the equation also. So this is one of the things that we've practiced in class. When I look at this table, I can see this one point, and it's right here when x is 4, y is 9. And if you look at the values of y above and below that, you can see there's symmetry here, right? So it goes to a -8 on either side, and then it goes to a -5 on either side. And then when I jump to this 0, right, it's easy for me to rationalize that this jump here is going to produce, when x is 7, that's another value of 0. So I can see with the addition of that point at the end of the table, I can see my x-intercepts. So my x-intercepts occur when x is 1. This function produces 0, and when x is 7, the function produces 0. Now, the other thing that I can see there is my y-intercept. Y-intercepts occur when x is 0, and you can see x is 0 right here. So my y-intercept is at 0 and then 7. So using those 3 points, right, my roots, my x-intercepts, and the y-intercept, I'm going to write the equation of the line that goes through that. And it will be of the form y equals a times x minus something times x minus something else. So what are the things that go in here? Well, it's the values of these intercepts, right? Well, so I'm going to write a -1 and a -7. So if you think about this, when I place +1 into that equation, it produces 0, right? +1, right? +1 makes this part of it 0, and once this is 0, everything's 0. And same thing's true with the other part. When I place the +7 in here, this becomes 0, and once that's 0, everything's 0, including the y on the other side. So now the other thing that I have is I have this extra point, right? I have this point, and I know that when x is 0, y is 7. So I'm going to just put in y is the number 7. Right? I'm still going to write this a. I don't know a yet. I'm trying to find it. But x is 0, so this is going to be 0 minus 1 and 0 minus 7, which is fabulous because what I've just written down is 7 equals a times -1 times -7, which is +7. And if I divide both sides by 7, I get that a is 1. So no adjustment was needed here, right? A is 1, and we found that perfectly. So we're ready to pretty much write down the equation of this. I'm just going to go ahead and multiply x minus 1 times x minus 7. And when I do, I get y is equal to x squared. Actually, this is the answer, isn't it? Y equals x squared minus, let's see, there's a -1x and a -7x, so minus 8x, and then plus the number 7. So this parabola, right, this equation should have these roots that are indicated, and it should have all these other table of value tables. Again, I'm going to check it, so I'm trying to get really quick at checking these. So I hit the y equals, clear my last equation, and I'm just going to hit x squared minus 8x. I squared it again. I'm always squaring that right there. That's not right. So it's x squared minus 8 and then times x and then plus the number 7. So I will graph that function, and once it's graphed I will hit trace, and while I'm tracing it, I know that 1 should produce 0, and it does, and I know 7 should produce 0, and it does, and I also know that if I enter the number 0 for x, it should produce an output of 7 for that y-intercept. Yeah, this is it. The other thing I can do is I can look at some of my tables of values. So there's a lot of numbers I can check here. If I enter 2, for example, it should tell me -5. Yep. 3 should tell me -8. Yep. 4 should tell me -9. It does. 5 should tell me -8. And 6 should say -5. So I can see this curve, this parabola here, is it give me exactly all these points. There is no doubt that y equals x squared minus 8x plus 7 is exactly the function that produced that particular table of values. Okay, so let's look at this graph. What I'm reading from this graph is pretty much the same information, right? I can see my x-intercepts and my y-intercepts. My x-intercepts look like they're occurring at -3, and it's producing 0 there, and at -1 it's producing 0. The other point that I see is, and I could use a lot of these, but oh, they want the y-intercept. When x is 0, y appears to be -3. So -3 and -1 are my x-intercepts, and 0, -3 is my y-intercept. Alright, so let's build the quadratic based on that information. So I'll go ahead and write down y equals a, and then I've got x, and I'm going to do x plus 3, and I'm going to do x plus 1. Yeah, and you know, it occurs to me now that what our book talked about, it was y equals a times x minus h. No, I stand corrected. They used d and they used f, so x minus f. So those are my, I'm going to plug in d and f are my roots. So if I plug in the -3, this becomes x minus -3, so I get y equals a, and then x minus -3 is plus 3, and then x for f, x minus -1 would be x plus 1. So that's how we dealt with that in class. Now that I know that, the other thing that I'm going to plug in is the fact that when x is 0, right, my y is -3, so I can write -3 in for y. Again, I'm going to write a again, but now I'm going to put in 0 for x, so 0 plus 3, and I'll write down 0 plus 1. And when I do that, I get -3 equals a times 3, which is this is going to be a pretty easy one also, because when I divide both sides by 3, right, -3 divided by 3, I end up getting that a is just a -1. So I'm pretty much ready to, well, let me expand this out, and then I'll go ahead and multiply everything by -1. So this is not the equation. It's y equals, I'll do x squared, and then that's what, plus 3x plus 4x plus 3. And then I need to multiply, right, because I've got this value of a. I need to multiply everything by that a. So y is, so I guess the equation I'll write is y is equal to -x squared plus 4x, and then plus the number 3. And again, I'm going to check this. Let me grab my calculator and clear y equals, clear the whole thing. So I've got -x squared, and I'm going to add to that plus 4x, and then plus 3. So I'll graph that function. Yes, it's opening. Uh-oh. Oh, I did a terrible job of multiplying by -1. Just terrible. Just terrible. I hope you can see how shameful this is for me. This, and this are supposed to be negative. And I can see I've got this -1 and I was just supposed to distribute it to every one of these, but it's just shameful. So I'll just swallow my pride and I'll erase this and I'll correct it. So this should be a minus 4x and a minus 3. So you can see what happened is I looked at what this graph looks like on the test question, then I looked at the graph I produced and I'm just like, oh, I'm just awful. It's just awful. So let me hit y equals and go correct this. And those of you that were shouting at your YouTube client, thank you for paying attention. So there we go. Negative the opposite of x squared minus 4 times x, and then finally I have to subtract the number 3. Now if I graph it, oh, look at how familiar that looks. It looks just pretty much like the test one, the test question. So I'll hit trace and I'll just verify my points. -3 should give me 0. It does. -1 should give me 0. It does. And then also 0 should give me -3. It does. And it also looks like if I entered a 1, I should get -8, and I do. And it also looks like if I enter -5, I should also get the number -8, and I do. That's fabulous. So I'm just checking out some of the other points that were on the graph there. Alright, so that is the equation for part B. So again, on this equation, right, we're given a table, we're given a graph, and we end up figuring out the x and y intercepts. It's useful that you were asked to find that, because that's good information to use to build the equation that produces those outputs. So we found our two different equations. One was x squared minus 8x plus 7. The other one was the opposite of x squared, minus 4x and minus 3. And that is it.